Business arguments in the EU referendum moved centre stage following the resignation of the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce. John Longworth, who quit his role after voicing support for a Brexit, denied claims there had been political pressure on him to leave. But some out supporters expressed dismay at the turn of events.
I think it's very sad that a guy like John Longworth, who's dedicated his life to British business, British industry, should effectively have been gagged in this conversation that we're now having about whether to stay in the European Union. He's got a very bright, optimistic vision for this country.
I think the Leave campaign are coming up with these conspiracy theories because they're still being pressed to answer some basic questions like, if you're going to leave, where are you going? What's the plan B? Nearly half our trade is with Europe. There are a lot of jobs at stake. And really, they need to start answering these questions now instead of coming up with these rather far-fetched conspiracy theories.
We're now joined by the pro-EU founder of Business for Scotland, MacIntyre-Kemp, and the managing director of the manufacturing company White House Products, Alastair MacMillan, who wants the UK to leave the EU. Thank you both for joining us. Alastair MacMillan, what's the business case for leaving the EU?
The business case for leaving the EU is that the world has become a series of networks, and we are rather locked into this grouping of countries, which means that the flexibility to trade and have agreements with the rest of the world is limited. Also, I feel that we need to have greater control over how the business environment in this country is. The EU has grabbed more and more powers, and it's having a bigger and bigger impact on how we do business. And I feel that in the long run, we're much better coming out, and I don't feel that there's anything to be frightened about.
MacIntyre-Kemp, first of all, and John Longworth, you think he was right to go?
Yeah, I think he had to go. The Chambers of Commerce across the UK, 70% of the members want to stay. The organisation itself, despite that, has decided to be neutral. You can't then, as the Chief Executive or the Director General of an organisation, actually decide to campaign against your own organisation's wishes and against your members' wishes. Across the whole of the UK, you see that small businesses, small to medium-sized enterprises are fairly much pro-EU. It's only at the top end, not top end, but the larger companies that seem to have problems. And those same rules would have applied to me as well as Chief Executive of Business for Scotland. Fortunately, I'm pro-EU. And my members are pro-EU. We surveyed 500 of them, and they said 82% wanted to stay in the EU. And the reason for that, and this is the business case for staying, is that access to the European common market can only really be guaranteed to be seamless, to be easy, and to be affordable if we stay in the EU. That provides opportunities for exports, that creates jobs, better paid jobs, and better quality jobs for the people of Scotland. So that's why Business for Scotland's campaigning to stay in the EU.
And how would you react to these particular points, Alistair?
Well, I just don't really see it myself. I mean, we trade with over 100 countries around the world, and we actually find that it's more expensive trading in many cases with the EU than it is, say, with the United States. I mean, we ship next day to the United States. We can't necessarily do that with the EU. But what we would like to do is to be able to build our business in South America. And we can't. The EU is not going to have a trade agreement with Brazil or Argentina. It has with Chile, but Chile is a very small market. The UK, as a smaller entity, should have a greater ease in negotiating trade agreements. We were able, before the EU took over, we were able to rapidly build up a lot of investment protection agreements with the rest of the world. And when the EU acquired that responsibility, they have failed hardly to establish any of those agreements since. And I think as a smaller entity, we can actually get further.
Oh, what about that then? It'd be easier to make trade deals with other countries, other parts of the world?
Two things jump out at me there. First of all, that's the exact opposite of the argument that Better Together were making during the independence referendum, that a small country wouldn't be able to negotiate all these trade deals. So it's a flip there in terms of that argument. But the other thing is that the EU is making trade deals, bilateral trade deals all across. It's doing ones with Canada right now, with America, and also Britain is free as a nation in its own right, independent, currently, but also interdependent and interconnected with the EU and the rest of the world to make trade negotiations with whoever it wants outside the EU. EU can do deals, and we can do deals, and we can trade much more effectively. Now, the TTIP thing that's coming through, the deal that's coming through right now, has some problems in there. It's actually the UK that are actually keeping those problems in there. The EU wants to drop things like the arbitration courts. It's David Cameron who claims it's his idea, and that he says he's going to put a rocket under it and get it signed. So we could end up signing a really negative trade deal with the United States, and the EU could end up with a better one if we Brexit.
You disagreed on that point then, Alistair?
I'm not a politician. I don't know an enormous amount about TTIP, but I think TTIP sounds like an overcomplicated bit of work.
But on the trade agreements,
no, trade agreements. I think it's untrue. I mean, we cannot negotiate a free trade deal with our Commonwealth cousins. When we went into the EU, we had to tear up all the trade agreements we had with Australia, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth countries. There are a lot of countries in, all over the world.
Where the EU one would supersede, yes.
Sorry?
Where the EU agreement would supersede.
We could not give preferential trade to New Zealand and Australia, and I'm just saying that I feel that we as Britain, with greater control over our future, would be much better able to.
But given that the EU is such a large part of the UK market, what would our relationship be there?
Well, the EU takes 45% of our exports, yes. But our deficit with the EU last year was 80 billion. It has on average been about 55 billion. Now, that means that they're selling us considerably more. Are they really going to cut off their nose to spite their faces? Cut off their hands to spite their faces. It's just not going to happen. The BMW, Mercedes, whatever, are not going to want to have been paying duties, selling their business stuff in the UK.
When you look at the EU and say that it's actually selling us more than we're selling it, you have to remember the EU is 28 countries, not one country. And what you also have to remember is that for the last couple of generations, Westminster's followed a strategy of keeping the pound strong for the finance industry, and that has harmed exporters. It is actually, well, obviously if the pound is stronger, then it makes it more difficult to actually buy goods manufactured in this country. And Westminster's also made decisions that have actually stopped companies from exporting, such as the account consignor programme, which meant that a lot of engineering products were actually more difficult to export. And I know you'll have had problems with that yourself. So my members are actually more positive about the decisions the EU's made about reflecting business than actually Westminster has
What
recently.
about this EU market, though? Alistair has made the point that it's actually, in some regards, a shrinking market because of the economic problems that they have. So access to the shrinking market.
Well, taking a larger share of a shrinking market is not a bad strategy, especially when the global market is shrinking. And we've also got increased competition from China. And I think being part of a trading bloc is very important, but it's very important on several levels as well, because you've got to also think about the freedom of movement of skilled labour in particular. I mean, our NHS couldn't survive without migrant workers. Our building sites would grind to a halt. You couldn't really staff your care homes without EU workers. There just isn't. There's a shortage of people willing to do these jobs, and these people pay during the time they're here 45% more taxes than people born in Scotland.
Let me put that to if we did leave the EU, and there's talk of we would still have access to the EU, surely they wouldn't allow us to do that without things like freedom of movement of people.
I don't think necessarily. I think we should be able to get a trade agreement which is simply a trade agreement. I mean, this is the fundamental issue, is that we've acquired all this other political baggage, which is really what I would say most people in Britain don't really want to have to deal with. We went into this for trade originally in the 70s. I think the problem with the free movement from the point of view of Britain, we've had 300,000 migrants coming into the UK in the last year, and we have not been able to choose the best people that we've needed. We've ended up with a lot of low-skilled people coming from Eastern Europe, rather than being able to choose high-skilled people who we might have actually needed from the rest of the world. The other thing is that a lot of the free movement, certainly from southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, is movement of people who are highly skilled from there because of the failure of the Eurozone policy and the suffering that that has brought. And, you know, that is just...
That's actually just not the case, though. The skills that come to this country from the EU tend to be the ones that we need because we've got a shortage of them. There's a good match up there. You talk about the political baggage that comes with the EU, political baggage such as stronger workers' rights, such as maternity pay, such as holiday pay, you know, such as the human rights that are part of being part of the EU that Westminster wants to get rid of so they can try and make businesses more competitive. If you look at the bigger picture,
it's always Westminster's fault.
If you look at well, it's always Europe's fault as far as you're concerned.
No, I'm not saying it's okay.
We need to wind up very quickly. Just finish your point.
It's good for the economy. It creates jobs. It creates better paid jobs, and it's better to stay in.
And this argument will continue over the next few months, no doubt. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us.